Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hey, it's a great day. I'm Mark Imperial, and welcome to the program. Nick Sloane is president of Sloan Wealth Management and has been an outstanding financial services professional for over 30 years. He's certified by the American College in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania as a chartered financial consultant and has received the Certified Retirement Counselor designation by the International Federation for Retirement Education. He acts as a fiduciary investment advisor representative of SGL Financial, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Nick's been featured in such publications as the Chicago Tribune, U.S. News and World Report, the Daily Herald, Fiduciary News, and Financial Advisor Magazine, among others. Nick, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So, Nick, tell us about Sloan Wealth Management and the types of clients that you specialize in helping.
Well, as you noted, Mark, we've been in business for over 30 years, and primarily, I would say my clientele is roughly ages early 50s to late 60s. You know, generally, you would call them the baby boomer type of folks. So, yes.
So what is the number one worry that your clients face when they come to see you?
Well, you know, it's interesting. That's a great question. One of the things that I do is I teach retirement planning classes at western suburbs of Chicago, various colleges in that area, an adult ed class for people that I've just described to you in terms of who I work with. One of the questions that I start out asking them is, what are some of the things you want to be sure to get out of this class? So people list a variety of things, and they're all pretty similar in the sense of the types of questions that are asked. But if I were to summarize what it really comes down to, people are ultimately concerned about not having enough money. They're concerned about potentially running out of money during retirement, and they want to make sure that that's, as best they can, that won't happen. So that's kind of the best way to summarize what people are really concerned about.
So tell me a little bit more about that, Nick. How do you specifically help them navigate and overcome these kind of worries?
You know, it's another great question, Mark. It's very interesting in that most people I found, in fact, it's beyond most people, it's almost everyone, they don't have a simple but yet detailed plan to ensure that they will have enough money. I ask people in my class, how many of you have a written plan for making sure that you have enough income in retirement? Almost no one will raise their hand. Sometimes people think they have a plan for retirement. In other words, they have a 401k over here, they have a rollover IRA here, they have their Roth IRA over here, they've got some insurance policies that they have accumulated, life insurance, perhaps some annuities, and they think that that's their plan. What it really amounts to is the ingredients for a plan. You know, if you were to lay out the ingredients to make a souffle, that will not make the souffle. It's how you combine those ingredients, and the same thing applies to retirement planning. How do you gather all of what you have, make it work most efficiently, such that you have the best possible opportunity to have a great retirement?
I just recently read a shocking statistic that said something like 80% or more of folks out there are not properly planned for retirement. Is that right?
Well, that's essentially what I've been saying. And, when it comes down to it, as I talked about a moment ago about the concerns people have, there was a survey done that most people are more concerned with running out of money than they are of actually dying. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, wait a second. Yeah, it's kind of like a living death almost, which I can see would be worse to contemplate than actually passing away. So in other words, as your assets start to quote unquote expire, so does your lifestyle. So I think the main thing here is, how do people create a plan that will serve them best in retirement? But you have to have a starting point at the same time. Some people might remember the famous baseball player Yogi Berra, and he was known for his colorful use of language, or malapropisms, I think they were called. And one of the things he said, if you don't know where you're starting out from, you might wind up someplace else, which is actually kind of true. So my job is, in a beginning sense, when I start to work with clients to plan, where do we need to start? And that's the beginning of how I work with clients.
So there's obviously a lot of information out there, good or bad, on the internet. So I'd imagine that might cause a lot of confusion. What's the biggest misconception that many people believe from what they're hearing and reading out there?
Well, I'll tell you, I agree. The internet can be a great source of certain information. I'm a history buff, so if I want to learn about a particular event, say, for example, in the Civil War, I can generally find relatively accurate information. When it comes to financial information, however, yes, there is good information, but how do people position themselves to attract traffic to their website? They often are controversial, or they maybe contextualize certain aspects of a particular way to help yourself that might not be necessarily appropriate. And on top of that, of course, you have friends, family. My brother-in-law says I should never do X, which, of course, there may be no basis in fact for that. So, and the other part to answer your question is there's so many misconceptions, but I think one that comes to my mind is so many people assume that their assets, and what I mean by assets, I'm talking about those who have all of their money in the stock market, for example, that drawing from those assets is going to work well for them. They feel confident in many cases that will work well for them. And of course, some people are worried about that. They feel that that's the only place to put their money because they're concerned about having enough growth. But by the same token, that can affect them negatively if the market drops. So I would say it's the areas around how to use their money. If most of their money is going to help, that's going to help them derive income, comes from the stock market.
If I understand you correctly from what you described, you mentioned earlier people have what it sounds like to me, random acts of investments here and there, but it's not really a solid plan, so to speak. Is that a benefit of working with an advisor from yourself, like putting together some sort of a machine that's predictable?
Right. Well, that is something that I talk about a lot, and really to kind of tout myself here a little bit is that what I try to do is work with people from the perspective of how their emotion-based behavior has really the biggest impact on the success or failure of their retirement. And because we are human beings, and obviously I'm one too, we can often act in irrational ways. So in a sense, I'll give you another example. In my office building, I met a young lady once. She's a psychotherapist, and she asked what I did. And I told her, and she says, well, you're a therapist too. And, in sort of a way, that's true. So if I were to put it in very basic terms, a good advisor or the right advisor really starts from helping clients to avoid shooting themselves in the foot. Because so many of our decisions that are based on our emotions, which unfortunately, a lot of the time that's the case, doesn't necessarily serve us that well.
You're like the financial whisperer. You're protecting people against themselves. So
yeah, I think to a certain degree, because again, there are motivations for a lot of people in how they behave in terms of their money. So a lot of people have a lot of overconfidence. They are basing, for example, the fact that they can easily or readily develop enough income based upon the fact that the stock market has been doing so well over the past 8 or 9 years. And of course, that also means that they have relatively short-term memories, because if you go back another 8 or so years, you'll find that the market was extremely volatile. There was a huge down market, obviously, in the early 2000s, 3 years in a row, and then we had 2008. So the question that I try to ask people, at the right time is, what would happen? How would you feel if we had another 2008? And again, it's a matter of what people believe. The problem, from my standpoint as well, it isn't what I understand, because I do know a lot. It's what people believe, and people believe what they want to believe. So if I'm doing my job well, in some cases it's a kind of a Socratic dialogue where we just ask questions to kind of dig down and go underneath of what people's assumptions are, why they may be based in reality, and to a certain extent why they might be based on old data. Things certainly have changed in the financial field, and so how they think and how they behave makes a huge difference. So again, the right type of advisor, I think, can help guide people through the process of developing and monitoring their plan. It ultimately speaking, it's their plan. My job is to help them in designing their plan. And that's how I work.
So give me an example. Speaking of guidance, tell me about a couple of big pitfalls or traps that people must consider today when it comes to their retirement.
There are so many things that can impact your retirement, and frequently these are things that people don't even think of. Some people might have heard the phrase, there are things we know, there are things we know we don't know, and then there are things we don't know we don't know.
Yep.
And again, with my experience, I can help people uncover the things that they don't know. So to give you just one example, it goes back to what we were just saying about people's thinking that it might be a good idea for them to just, because they feel that's the only place, again, that can have their money that will work for them, is to draw down assets out of their savings, which, of course, is part of a plan. However, there's some old rules, and again, this is where we get into misassumptions or old data. There's old rules of handling your money that are pretty much out of date. One of them, some of the listeners may be familiar with this, some of them may not. It's called the 4% rule. And the 4% rule suggests that in retirement, you can draw down your assets and take out as much as 4%, then adjust it upwards for inflation, and not have a chance of running out of money for 30 years or more. Well, here's the problem with that. If, as I said before, if we have a down market, especially early in retirement, now what happens? Well, instead of your money lasting for 25 or 30 years, it might last for 10 to 15 years, because it's not the average return that matters. So, for example, what I mean by that is that often people think, well, I'm averaging 6%, therefore I should be able to take out 4 or 5, no problem. Well, that's not the point. That's actually misleading. It's not the average return that matters, it's the order of those returns. So if you have a crystal ball, then if you were to tell me, I know exactly how the market's going to perform over the next 5 or 10 years. Now, we're assuming, of course, that you're very close to retirement, or perhaps in the early stages of retirement. Then I can tell you what to do with your money. Otherwise, it's like what Clint Eastwood said in one of his movies, are you feeling lucky? And I think for a lot of the people that I work with, they don't want to put themselves that far out on a limb. So when they understand this concept, and it's called the sequence of returns risk, if they understand this concept well, that might give them pause and think, geez, maybe we need to do things a little differently. So that would be just one of many misconceptions that people might have.
Nick, do you find that people typically seek outside help with their planning? You mentioned that a lot of people don't have plans, or they try to do it themselves. Is that really the most common thing? And what's the benefit of working with an advisor over trying to do it yourself?
Well, I wouldn't have a percentage per se, but I think that there certainly are a lot of people who, well, simply by default, they've been busy with their lives, they throw all this money into their 401ks, and they don't think about it too much. So you could say that their do-it-yourselfers strictly from the standpoint that they simply don't want to pay attention. And then, of course, there are people that feel very confident because they've been around money all their lives, and they've had some success, which, again, past 8 or 9 years, we're all looking like geniuses with our money, and therefore they believe that they're going to be fine and that they like to keep that control. But on the other hand, there are many people that have had advisors for a long period of time. And there's good and bad with that as well. The good part is they've got and established a relationship. The bad part, it might be that particular advisor may not be doing everything he should be doing or she should be doing for clients. And by virtue of the fact that they're not specialists in terms of retirement planning, they have certain biases, and those biases may not even be known or thought about by the advisor, but they're certainly not disclosed to their clients. So the problem, I think, for a lot of people also boils down to the issue of trust. If you go back to 2008, when everybody lost money, what the problem there was, it wasn't just that people lost faith in financial institutions or they lost faith in people like me in terms of our ability to do the right job. I think they lost faith in their own sense of judgment because they felt they were doing everything right, properly diversified, saving a good amount of money, and then all of a sudden things dropped through the floor. So for a lot of people, it's not what it boils down to. They don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to choose the wrong advisor. They don't want to consider moving their money, even if they feel their current advisor isn't necessarily doing the right job for them. And they simply don't want to make a mistake. And therefore, even if there's a little pain in their lives when it comes to their money, they want to stick with the familiar. The pain they know is better than the unknown that might cause them more pain. So that's one of the difficult things. And as I say, I think most people could benefit from working with a good advisor.
I'd imagine that people also have a fear of getting like financially naked with an advisor. Is that another thing that people fear in speaking to an advisor? What do you find?
Well, I guess I already answered that question to a certain degree. And I think you're right about the fact that in many cases they don't even know what questions to ask. If you particularly take a lot of the people that come to see me, and they are kind of stumbling around in some cases because they don't even know how an advisor can really help them. They don't know what questions to ask. So part of, again, my job is to help them, guide them by asking questions. What's your biggest concern? We kind of dig down with that, and then we look at where their finances are and see if we can make them work a little more efficiently. And there are a variety of ways that we do that. Everybody's situation, of course, is different. And what I might do for one client could be very, very different with another. When it comes to an advisor that they're already working with, they may not realize, well, wait a second here. Nick just showed us that we're overpaying in fees, we're not well diversified, and we might not have our finances set up in such a way that we can develop enough income, particularly guaranteed income, that will last as long as we do. So there's a variety of concerns, there's a variety of fears, but again, everybody's situation is different, and whatever it is that they bring in to see me about or talk to me about, that's what needs to be addressed. And as I say, it can come from a variety of directions.
So, Nick, not only are you working with clients now, but you're also teaching adult education courses in retirement at local colleges. So what inspired you to become an advisor and help people with their retirement planning? How'd you get started?
Well, that's a little bit of an interesting story. When I grew up and decided to go to college, I simply followed the footsteps of the rest of my family. I was a liberal arts major. In hindsight, I realized I probably should have gone to business school. So after college, I started a few businesses, few companies. They were pretty successful, but my heart really wasn't into it. And I really wanted to learn more about money and how it works for people. I didn't want to go to college again for that. So I simply got hired in a financial services company and kind of learned on the job. You could call it, the first 2 years of college where you're trying to seek a major. And as time went along, I found my major, which is, to help people build wealth, but at the same time to help protect that wealth so that people don't lose a lot of money. as I got more into my career, and particularly when my mother could no longer take care of my grandmother at home, I started to see how emotionally problematic that could be for people and how much they really could benefit from getting some help as they got older. So that's when I started, that's when I started shifting my practice to working with people who are getting closer to retirement. And I have found that to be very rewarding. I cannot tell you how many times after we've done a plan together that I just see this look on people's faces that they feel relieved. They feel like, my goodness, now we have a plan. We know that we're not going to have to panic if the market drops. We know we're going to probably have plenty of income. Obviously, there's no 100% security in life. Life has its risks, but I think we can reduce those risks significantly so that people feel like they've got their finances handled. And of course, things do change, so having some ability to adjust as needed is also part of the equation. So I think that that's something that's very important to mention.
Do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom, or maybe a question that I didn't think to ask you that you'd like to let people know about?
Well, I think it really comes down to, of course, I do have an axe to grind here, but I think the benefits of having an advisor are really important. So one of the things, for example, that I do towards the end of my classes, and these are pretty extensive, in-depth retirement planning classes, one of the things that I go through is questions to ask an advisor. Now, this could be for people that are considering working with an advisor. This might be questions to ask a current advisor. So we go through a list of those questions, and I think that can be very helpful for people. So when it comes to retirement planning, I think there are several things that a good advisor can provide for people. One is that they are retirement income specialists. A lot of people say that they really help you in that area, but what they're really more interested in is simply managing investments because that's what they know. And another part of that is that they have a certain bias, which is any problem you bring to them, they're going to fix strictly from a market-based approach. And there's lots of different avenues, lots of different products that an unbiased advisor can really help them with. And of course, the other part of it is, other than investments and how you can go up and go down, which of course that's what the stock market does, it also comes down to there's more than just investments. There's more than just your dollars and how you're going to use them that can have a significant impact on your retirement. Healthcare costs, long-term care costs. There's planning mechanisms for people for such things as long-term care if they're willing to pursue them, and they may not even involve using insurance because people need plans in these certain areas that they might want to not look at. And I think a good advisor's job is to be very proactive. Instead of the advisor giving up in bringing up certain issues like this, I think it's very important for an advisor to be persistent because that's what a good advisor should do. Now, the other part of it is, and this is something that's also a little known factor, is that advisor a fiduciary? And what I mean by a fiduciary is someone who has a legal obligation to put your interests first. After the crash, I felt I was always a fiduciary in that sense. I always try to look out for my clients first. But because of what happened after the crash, I chose that liability because there is a higher degree of liability. There's a higher degree of regulatory oversight and so on. So making sure that your advisor is a true fiduciary in every aspect of how they're going to help you with their money, I think is a really place to start.
So, Nick, you mentioned classes that you teach at the local colleges. Do you have other resources or ways that people can connect with you? How do people find you, get to know you, see if you're a good match, and find out more? How can they find you?
Well, besides people who choose after the class, once they really get a good grasp of who I am as a person, and I think that's useful, they might choose to come and see me. I do other events. I've got upcoming events that I list on my website, and I'll go ahead and give that to you. It's www.Sloane, and that's spelled Sloane, so it's Sloan with an E on the end. So that's www.sloanwealthmanagement.com. And on my website, I've got a list of events that come up from time to time, approximately once a month or so. And we have a list of those on the website. The other thing that I, in situations like this, because I have written books and or book chapters on retirement planning, and I do list some other things that people could I could help them with. For example, there's what's called a investment analysis. It's an objective investment analysis that, in essence, shows people, are they getting their bang for the buck? Are they taking too much risk with their money, or they're not getting the return for the level of risk that they're taking? And this, again, is an objective report that can show people how well they're doing. And most people have never even thought of how much risk they're taking and are they getting the return they want. So for people that are listening to this program and they want to contact me on that, I usually charge a fee for that, but I'd be happy to waive that fee just to give people a chance to see how I work.
Fantastic. Nick, give out your URL one more time for your website.
Sure. It's www.sloanwealthmanagement, Sloane, sloanwealthmanagement.com.
Nick, this has been absolutely terrific. Great information. I really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy week to join us and share on the program today. And I wish you continued success for you and for all of your clients.
Well, thanks, Mark. It's been a privilege.
I'm Mark Imperial, and this is Remarkable Radio. And we'll see you again on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.